December 19, 1944. The dense, frozen forests of Belgium were alive with tension. 40 American soldiers found themselves surrounded by 300 German troops during the Battle of the Bulge. It was one of the coldest winters in memory. Snow crusted the ground, and the trees offered little cover. Every step forward or backward could mean life or death. The Americans were exhausted, low on supplies, and acutely aware that they were completely outnumbered. Morale was fragile, yet survival depended on staying calm, thinking clearly, and making every move count. Among the Americans was Sergeant Buck Anderson, a man whose reputation didn't come from military accolades alone. Before the war, he had spent over 15 years hunting elk in the rugged mountains of Montana. Those long hours, waiting silently in the cold, lining up shots with precision, and understanding how to move without being detected, had honed skills that no ordinary soldier possessed. Yet in the eyes of some of his comrades, hunting experience was no preparation for combat. They called it irrelevant, a waste of ammunition to even attempt long-range shots. The Germans, confident in their numbers, maintained a distance of roughly 400 yards, believing they were safely out of rifle range. They patrolled and observed, thinking the small group of Americans was cornered and helpless. But Anderson had other plans. He could see patterns in the German movements, the moments when they exposed themselves, and the faint glint of metal that betrayed a rifle barrel. Every detail mattered. In the cold light filtering through the forest canopy, he mentally calculated angles, distances, and bullet drop, relying on instincts honed in the silent Montana wilderness. His commander, looking from a nearby position, shook his head. "You're wasting bullets," he said. But Anderson's mind was focused. He wasn't thinking in terms of volume of fire. He thought in terms of precision. Each shot had a purpose. Each pull of the trigger was designed not just to hit a target, but to disrupt, to create fear, and to slowly shift the psychological balance. The Germans believed they were safe. That belief would soon become their greatest vulnerability. Anderson checked his Springfield 1903, fitted with an Unertl scope, a rifle that had been reliable for years and now rested steady in his hands. He remembered the long Montana mornings when elk would move silently across valleys and ridges, and he had learned patience, focus, and the importance of breathing control. Those lessons, learned far from the chaos of war, now mattered more than ever. He was alone in his method, yet entirely confident that the skills which had allowed him to stalk and kill prey in the wilderness could also save the lives of his men. The forest seemed almost alive that day, with shadows playing tricks on the eyes and every sound amplified in the cold stillness. Anderson's heart beat steadily as he scanned the distance. The Germans laughed, shouted, and moved carelessly, unaware of the invisible threat among the trees. For the first time, the Americans felt a glimmer of hope. A single man, with unmatched focus, could challenge 300. And as the hours ahead would show, the lessons of Montana elk hunting were about to meet the harsh reality of the Ardennes forest in a way that no one could have predicted.
Anderson's rifle was more than a weapon. It was an extension of his senses, a tool shaped by years of patient discipline in the Montana wilderness. The 1903 Springfield he carried was fitted with a Unertl scope, a precision instrument capable of hitting targets at distances most soldiers considered impossible. Many of his comrades doubted the value of long-range shooting. They believed that hunting skills had little to do with combat, that the chaos of a battlefield made careful calculation useless. But Anderson knew differently. Every elk he had stalked had taught him to read the terrain, to judge distances in the blink of an eye, and to anticipate the movements of something far more alert and deadly than a human opponent. He adjusted the scope carefully, making sure the reticle aligned perfectly, and began observing the Germans through the cold glass. From this distance they appeared confident, almost arrogant. They moved in formations they thought were safe, laughed loudly, and revealed small gaps in their discipline. Anderson noted every pattern, when a soldier would shift position, when a rifle barrel would briefly shine in the weak winter light, when footsteps betrayed movement through the snow. All of these details, invisible to most, were critical. A single miscalculation could mean wasted ammunition, or worse, the loss of a comrade. His training in Montana had taught him patience above all else. He remembered sitting for hours in sub-zero temperatures, waiting for elk to appear in valleys or on ridgelines. Those long, silent hours honed his ability to control breathing, remain motionless, and focus intensely on a single point. Combat required similar discipline, only the stakes were infinitely higher. Every shot had to count. Every missed opportunity could cost lives. Unlike typical battlefield firefights, where bullets were sprayed and chaos reigned, Anderson relied on methodical precision. The rifle's recoil was steady and predictable. The scope allowed him to judge exact ranges, and his mind calculated the trajectory for every shot. He visualized the Germans' movements, predicting where they would be in the next moment. The forest around him seemed to shrink, becoming a series of calculated angles, shadowed pockets, and potential targets. The soldiers he protected didn't fully understand what he was doing, but they felt the change in energy, a subtle shift as the Germans began to sense that someone was watching, that someone was picking them off with uncanny accuracy. Even as his commander muttered complaints about ammunition waste, Anderson ignored them. In his mind, each bullet was not wasted, it was an investment in survival. He remembered stories from older hunters in Montana who spoke of patience and timing as the difference between success and failure. On this winter day in Belgium, those lessons were more relevant than ever. Anderson knew that speed without accuracy meant nothing. Calm focus, careful calculation, and precise execution, that was his path. By the end of the first hour, subtle changes began. The Germans' confidence wavered, small hesitations creeping into their patrols. Anderson continued scanning, breathing deliberately, measuring distance, and controlling each trigger pull. Every shot reinforced the lesson he had learned long before the war. Patience was power, and mastery of skill could overcome overwhelming numbers. In the quiet, snow-covered forest, a rifleman and his hunting-honed abilities were about to prove that one man could alter the course of an entire siege.
The first shot cracked through the stillness of the Belgian forest like a lightning strike. It was precise, deliberate, and terrifyingly effective. Buck Anderson had chosen his moment carefully, waiting until a German soldier moved just enough to expose a tiny target. The bullet found its mark, and the man fell without warning. For the Americans, it was a shock of hope. For the Germans, it was the beginning of disbelief. They had believed themselves out of range, safe in their formations, confident in the sheer number of their forces. But now, the invisible danger had announced itself. Anderson continued methodically. Each shot was calculated, aimed at the weak points of the enemy. He knew the importance of making every bullet count. Ammunition was finite, and his method required patience rather than volume. He remembered elk hunting, where a single shot could mean life or death for the animal, and a careless miss could ruin the hunt. In the same way, a careless shot here could waste time, reveal his position unnecessarily, or fail to strike terror. Every pull of the trigger had to be precise, and the stakes were exponentially higher. As the minutes passed, the Germans began to notice. Shouts echoed through the trees as soldiers fell unpredictably, their formations disrupted by an unseen hand. Confusion spread rapidly. A sniper operating at a distance of 400 yards was unheard of to them. They began to pause before moving, scanning the forest nervously, whispering to one another, unsure where the next strike would come from. Anderson's goal was not only to eliminate enemy soldiers, but to fracture their confidence. Psychological warfare, he knew, could be as powerful as any rifle. The Americans huddled, watching their comrade at work.
There was tension, yes, but also an undercurrent of awe. They had never seen a man operate with such patience and precision, turning what appeared to be a hopeless situation into one of opportunity. Each German casualty served as a warning, a signal that their previous assumptions about safety were false. Anderson adjusted his scope, took note of the snow, the angle of the sun, and even the tiniest movements in the underbrush. He moved slowly, silently, calculating trajectories and anticipating the Germans' reactions. Time seemed to stretch in those moments. Hours would feel like minutes. Anderson's breathing was controlled, steady, almost ritualistic. He had learned to slow his pulse while hunting elk to avoid startling prey, and now the same techniques allowed him to remain calm under fire. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, every crack of a branch, every distant whistle of wind carrying amplified significance. A misstep could be fatal, yet each calculated shot gave the Americans hope that the siege could be broken. By the third hour, the psychological impact was undeniable. The Germans hesitated more frequently, their movements cautious, almost fearful. They began to question their assumptions, muttering about the impossibility of being targeted from such distance. Anderson had proven that hunting skills, patience, and precise marksmanship could transcend the mountains of Montana and wreak havoc on a heavily armed, confident enemy. The line between hunter and soldier blurred in the snowy Ardennes forest. Every shot was a lesson, every pause a tactical maneuver. Anderson was not just fighting, he was teaching, manipulating, and reshaping the battlefield without ever being seen. The Germans learned, slowly and painfully, that no one was safe, that every moment of carelessness could be fatal. For the Americans, survival became a real, tangible possibility. The forest that had once seemed like a trap began to feel like a shield, a space where skill, patience, and precision could level the playing field. In those long hours, Sergeant Buck Anderson was proving that one rifleman, guided by experience, focus, and strategy, could change the course of an entire engagement.
The hours stretched on, frozen and unforgiving, as Sergeant Buck Anderson continued his relentless precision work. The forest seemed to close in around him, snow crunching softly underfoot, branches heavy with frost, every sound magnified in the cold stillness. For 6 straight hours he remained focused, breathing deliberately, each moment a careful calculation of distance, trajectory, and timing. The Germans believed themselves safe, lulled by the assumption that no rifleman could reach them from such distances. They were wrong, and the consequences were swift. Each shot from Anderson's Springfield 1903, with its Unertl scope, was deliberate in a way that made the enemy question reality. A soldier would move, expose himself for only a fraction of a second, and the bullet would find its mark. The air seemed to crackle with tension after every shot, echoes bouncing through the forest, each one a warning. He didn't fire rapidly, he fired with intent. One bullet, one target, one result. Psychological terror wrapped in deadly accuracy. The Germans' confidence began to fracture with each unseen strike. By the second hour, whispers had spread through the enemy lines. The men were terrified of shadows, of movement, of anything that seemed out of place. They had been trained for combat, for numbers, for power and overwhelming force, but they had not trained for invisible precision, for the quiet hunter striking from afar. Anderson's background in Montana elk hunting had conditioned him for patience, for understanding subtle signs in the environment, and for executing perfect timing. Those same lessons now translated seamlessly to combat. Every twitch, every movement from the Germans became an opportunity, every mistake a cost paid in lives.
The Americans huddled, watching from their concealed positions, hearts pounding as they witnessed the unfolding methodical destruction. Fear mixed with awe. Their small group had faced near impossible odds, but Anderson was rewriting the rules. He reminded them silently that skill and focus could outweigh sheer numbers. He made every bullet count, conserving ammunition while maximizing effect. The forest became a chessboard, and every German soldier a piece being carefully manipulated and removed by one extraordinary marksman. Around the third and fourth hour, exhaustion began to weigh heavily on both sides. The Americans had limited food and water, the bitter cold seeped into every layer of clothing, and yet morale surged as they saw the enemy hesitate, falter, and fall. The Germans, conversely, grew increasingly paranoid. Small mistakes became fatal. Patterns in movement, once unconscious and natural, were now scrutinized with fear. Anderson had turned uncertainty into his weapon. The invisible pressure, combined with the lethal precision of his rifle, created an atmosphere of terror that extended beyond the physical battlefield. By the fifth hour, 23 German soldiers had been eliminated. The number alone was staggering given the circumstances, but the psychological damage was arguably greater. Units that moved with confidence were now slowed, hesitant, and constantly looking over their shoulders. The siege, which had begun with the Americans completely surrounded, was showing cracks. Anderson's patience, honed over years of hunting, had given them not only hope but a tangible chance of survival. He had transformed what seemed like certain defeat into a slow, methodical weakening of the enemy's position. Throughout it all, Anderson remained a calm, silent force. His focus never wavered, his breathing steady, his mind calculating. Every shot was a combination of art and science. Wind, distance, movement, snow depth, and even the angle of the sun were all considered. Nothing was left to chance. In those 6 hours, he demonstrated that one person, equipped with skill, patience, and focus, could outmatch hundreds of soldiers relying solely on numbers. His actions were precise, unrelenting, and utterly transformative for the course of that day. As the 6th hour drew to a close, the Americans began to sense victory. The German soldiers were confused, fatigued, and demoralized. The pressure of unseen bullets had broken their rhythm, and their once confident siege had weakened. Anderson's method had succeeded. A combination of tactical brilliance, psychological manipulation, and unparalleled marksmanship had created a situation where 40 men could survive against 300. The Ardennes forest, once a trap, had become a proving ground where the skills of a Montana hunter met the harsh reality of war, reshaping the outcome of an entire engagement.
As the last echoes of gunfire faded into the snow-covered Ardennes forest, a strange quiet settled over the battlefield. The siege that had begun with 40 Americans trapped by 300 German soldiers was finally breaking. Sergeant Buck Anderson lowered his rifle for the first time in hours, his mind still sharp, calculating, and aware of every detail around him. Exhaustion tugged at his body, but a deep sense of accomplishment filled him. The impossible had been made possible through focus, skill, and patience. The Germans were retreating, confused and demoralized. Their once confident formations had dissolved under the relentless precision of a single rifleman. Units that had believed themselves untouchable were now hesitant, cautious, and fearful. The psychological impact of Anderson's long-range shooting had been as devastating as the physical toll. Soldiers who had laughed and taunted hours earlier were now retreating, uncertain where the next shot might come from. The forest, which had been their hunting ground, had become an unpredictable trap. The Americans emerged from their positions cautiously, scanning the trees and snow for any sign of lingering threats. The tension that had gripped them for 6 hours began to ease. One by one, men exchanged glances, recognizing the heroics of their comrade. Buck Anderson's patience, honed over 15 years of hunting elk in Montana, had not only kept them alive, but had transformed a near-suicidal situation into one of survival. It was a stark reminder that skills learned in one life could unexpectedly save lives in another. The commander, who had earlier doubted the value of Anderson's long-range shooting, now regarded him with newfound respect. "A munition well spent," he muttered, finally understanding that precision could outweigh brute force, that strategy and skill could triumph over overwhelming numbers. The soldiers around him began to recount what they had witnessed: careful calculations, perfectly timed shots, and the uncanny ability to strike targets at distances previously thought impossible. They had seen courage, patience, and mastery of skill converge in one man. Anderson, however, remained modest. He never sought recognition for his actions. In his mind, the forest, the rifle, and the lessons from Montana were simply extensions of his own experience. He had relied on knowledge that many dismissed, proving that adaptability, patience, and precision could change the tide of battle. His method had saved 40 American lives that day and left an indelible mark on the outcome of this small but crucial engagement during the Battle of the Bulge. In the aftermath, the forest was quiet once more, broken only by distant calls and the shuffling of retreating German troops. The Americans regrouped, tending to the wounded, counting their supplies, and reflecting on the extraordinary circumstances they had survived. Each man carried the memory of Anderson's methodical, deliberate precision, the way he had turned what seemed like an insurmountable threat into a manageable, even winnable situation. His approach was a reminder that war was not solely a matter of numbers, but of skill, focus, and the ability to use one's environment and training to maximum effect. Historians would later note that this engagement demonstrated the critical importance of marksmanship, psychological tactics, and the unexpected utility of non-military skills in combat. Buck Anderson's actions highlighted how experience from seemingly unrelated fields, such as hunting, could be decisive in a life-or-death scenario. In those 6 hours, he had rewritten the expectations of what a single rifleman could accomplish. The German's overconfidence, combined with his patience and precision, had created a rare moment where courage and skill triumphed over overwhelming odds. As night fell over the Ardennes, the forest returned to a cold, quiet stillness. The 40 Americans were safe, the Germans had withdrawn, and Sergeant Buck Anderson remained a figure of quiet heroism. His story became one of those untold legends of World War II, a testament to how patience, skill, and determination could bend the chaos of war into order, even if only for a single decisive day. It was a story of survival, ingenuity, and the extraordinary impact one person could have in the face of impossible odds.